Hi everybody, I'm Gordon Giltrap and welcome once again to the Guitar Practice Perfectly Studio, or as we like to call it, GPP TV. And today we have with us my very dear friend Raymond Burley. Ray, in my opinion, in many people's opinion, he wouldn't say this because he's too modest, one of this country's finest classical guitarists. With all the people we've had in the studio, we don't just focus on their technical ability, we focus on their creativity. Now, Raymond is not a composer, but Ray has this wonderful gift for arranging. And Ray in the past has written in a duo situation with he and I, with our double vision duo, trios, quartets, and it just goes on and on really. But Ray, welcome. It's great to have you here.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Well, it's lovely. One of the joys of being the ambassador for Guitar Practice Perfectly is I can have many of my friends in to chat with who happen to be world famous players. Ray, let's go back to the early days. How did you start out playing the guitar?
I started when I was about 10 or 11, getting a guitar for Christmas and not having a clue what to do with it.
Do you know, I was the same actually. In fact, you and I remember we had a conversation about this. I don't want to labour too much on the nostalgia thing, but is it true we both started out on a plastic Elvis Presley ukulele?
That's right, when I was probably about 8, I think, 8
yeah,
or 9.
That's exactly, I was 9 years old. And these little plastic things, we bought ours from a Freeman's catalogue, and mine had a picture of Elvis Presley on the headstock. But it was basically a plastic ukulele. But the great thing about that instrument was it taught you the mechanics of where you put your strings. Anyway, let's move on from there. So how old were you when you got your first proper 6-string guitar?
Probably 10 or 11, I think 11. Yeah. Which was a steel-strung Selmer 222 plywood box.
Oh, I remember those. You can still buy them on eBay, folks. Don't go there. And then I'm assuming, like all of us, you got into the electric guitar?
I did when I was about 14, I suppose, 13 or 14, copying pop songs at the time.
That's the way it goes, isn't it? This was in the Reading area where you were born and brought up. And you went on to play with various bands?
Oh, I played with lots of bands, some well known, some not very well known, but as it turned out, the ones that were not very well known were probably better than the ones that were well known.
Well, that can be the case a lot of the time. If fame doesn't equal talent, does it? It just means being in the right place at the right time. Let's move swiftly on to this beautiful classical guitar you have here in your hands. This is was it Philip Woodfield?
Philip Woodfield made in 2007. He's made me 3, 2 more since this, and I keep coming back to the first one because I think it's the best. He may not agree, but he's not a player; he's a maker.
Well, this is it, and I think what a lot of people don't understand, and it's a lesson I learned fairly recently. It's not the instrument; it's the player. And if you find an instrument you can bond with, even though it may have certain idiosyncrasies, little quirky things about it, but you get used to that instrument, don't you? Yeah. And you make it work for you.
Yeah.
But what I want to know now is, Ray, what turned you on to the classical guitar and that whole genre of music? Okay,
the last band I played with in Reading was actually a soul band, and I'm not a great soul music lover, but it was a terrific band, and I'm glad I joined it. It had saxophones, trombone, trumpet, drums, guitar, bass, singer. But the singer's father was a classical music fan, particularly of classical guitar music, and I knew nothing about it at all. And he said to me one day, "Have you heard Segovia?" And I'd never even heard of Segovia. And he gave me a little record, which I subsequently bought a copy of my own, and took it home, put it on, and I thought, I don't like it. Couldn't understand what he was doing, didn't really like the sound, didn't like the music. But one day I was in a record shop, or actually a music shop in Reading, and I noticed there was this piece of music for sale in guitar music box of one of the pieces on this particular recording. So I bought it, took it home, and found I could play it.
That's extraordinary. I mean,
I thought it was wonderful.
But how did you get to grips with the notation, though? I mean, to me, it's still a black art.
But I could read music at that time, but not particularly well. Yeah. But enough to get it from the page.
Did you teach yourself to read music?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Taught myself most.
Most of us are pretty much self-taught. I think in some ways it's the best way.
Yeah.
And in other ways not. If you're a creative musician, I think it develops your ear by you're exploring things and learning things as you go. So, did you learn to read the dots from books?
I think so, because there was nobody to ask at the time. I mean, music at my school was just non-existent. It was just an excuse to mess about.
Yeah, it was like with my school. You know, we used to learn. We used to sing like "Oh for the Wings of a Dove" and "Blow the Wind Southerly," and maybe a recorder may come out, but that was about it. Really, it was a waste of time.
Yeah, I mean, generally what the music teacher did was put an LP on, as they were at the time, and you just sat and listened to it.
But obviously, Ray, you must have had that kind of brain, and I think that whole kind of process of learning fascinates me. I mean, I've only in the last few years vaguely got to grips with notation, and even then, you could give me a piece of music, but it would take me weeks to work it out, and I would learn how to play it. Yeah. But with you, I think it's a natural thing.
Well, yes and no, I think, because to me, the classical repertoire, some things are written in tab. You can get tab versions of some pieces. But not all of them, of course. Eventually you run out and you have to go back to reading the notes. Now, to me, it makes much more sense to read it right from day one.
Do you know, my friend, the late, great Bert Jansch, said the same thing. Bert could read the dots. He said, I don't like tablature. It's strange that, isn't it? Maybe because if you're reading the dots, you can then work out your own fingering that works best for you.
Exactly. The tablet shows you where to place your fingers.
Yes.
The music doesn't. Yeah,
exactly. So you've got there's more parameters within reading the written notes.
Yeah.
At what point did you decide the classical guitar is for me, therefore I'm going to discard the electric guitar and focus all my energies, my life, if you like?
From about the age of 18, 19, I was doing the two side by side. Electric guitar at the weekends with bands, classical guitar in between. And it was clear that it had to really be one or the other, not both. So I agonised quite a lot over that, and eventually went to the classical guitar. It was more challenging, it was more rewarding, I felt. Because the thing with playing in a band is that you play the same stuff night after night after night. And if you're playing with professional bands on something like Top of the Pops, you're miming anyway. And I just felt underused, I suppose.
I can relate to that, particularly the Top of the Pops thing, of course, because I was on it a few times. Did you eventually find a teacher?
Yes, I did. I had no idea which teachers were good or bad. I looked in BMG magazine.
Oh God, I remember BMG.
Banjo, mandolin, guitar.
Is he still going?
I've no idea. Probably not.
Clifford Essex. Yes, wonderful shop.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
In the West End. Where was it?
Is it Ditchfield Street or something like that? It's off
Cambridge Circus.
Cambridge Circus, just off Cambridge Circus. We're wallowing in nostalgia here, folks. The days gone by, the good old days of Ivan Morantz and some great. I mean, the West End was crammed full of great shops, but there were some that specialised in classical guitar and this for the serious player.
Well, the thing about the Clifford Essex is that they sold a book called it's just a classical guitar tutor, I think, by Alonso Medio, who nobody ever heard of, including me. And I did a workshop in Guernsey or Jersey, I think it was Guernsey, and the guy came up to me after he played. He was in late 70s, I think, and he said, thank you for helping me out, that's really good. He said, you may know my book. He'd written the book, but his name was Alan Middleton.
I was going to say...
Also Medio. Medio meaning middle.
How wonderful, though.
Yeah. I said, well, you helped me.
Isn't that incredible? To meet the man that kind of wrote the book, that kind of just put you on the path, I think is extraordinary.
Yeah, it's just pot luck when I bought this particular book from Clifford Essex, and he wrote it.
Okay, let's move on to the teachers. Who was your first teacher?
Okay, at the back of BMG there was a whole 2 or 3 pages, I think, of teachers' names and address and phone numbers, contact details. And there was one in London that I'd actually heard of. His name was Alexis Chesnokov. And when I went to him, he was 78, 79. Very much the old school, as you would expect.
Absolutely.
He knew Segovia. He was actually Julian Bream's first teacher.
Wow.
But
you didn't know that?
I had no idea of that. And he took me on. And basically what I'd been doing, he felt was right.
Do you know, it's what I was saying earlier about the right time, right place. To find that man who was Bream's teacher, and you didn't know it, was so fortuitous, you know. Again, it's extraordinary.
Yeah.
And was he good? Did he? I mean,
I was in no position to judge, really. On reflection, probably not. He made me learn everything I ever played. So whether it was a simple exercise or a difficult piece, I had to play it from memory. And there's a set of studies by Carcassi that are still used a lot these days, 19th century. And he made me learn one a week. And I'd go to his house and he'd say, number 12. And I had to think, number 12. Play number 12. Following week, 14. And I'd go through all these 25
You must have had extraordinary memory even then, Ray.
But it was good training. I mean, at the time it seemed like a waste of time because there were lots of other things I wanted to do and this was taking up time to learn all this stuff. But on reflection, I can learn things now very quickly and retain them. So.
Yes, it's incredible that that early training, I think, stays in the subconscious. The other thing I wanted to ask you was that thing about so many musicians that we know, even when I was vaguely studying classical guitar, giving the music and I could play it, take the music away and I was lost.
Yeah.
So a lot of people, so many people are actually, you know, they are dictated by the piece of music. They will not retain that to memory. And when you look at anybody, including yourself, any great virtuoso in the classical field, you performed the Rodrigo guitar concerto hundreds of times. You must have had to commit that to memory.
Oh, sure.
And it still astonishes me, maybe because the older I get, the more the memory's going. And I'm in awe of people who can remember anything. But to remember a 25-minute piece of music, whatever, I think is extraordinary. But I suppose you just learn it in bite-sized chunks, didn't you?
Yeah, but the thing is, if you're an actor learning Shakespeare play, you're learning a play of, 3 hours?
Yes.
They're doing that all the time.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the human brain is incredible, Richard, to actually retain all that. What do you think was one of the most important pieces of advice when you were learning classical in terms of practice and how you can move on with your playing?
I don't think I've ever been given any advice like that, really, because most of the things and goals I set myself. So, I mean, things I've done exams in the past, and there's certain big concerts that you prepare for, but no major piece of advice. I mean, the way I learnt is by listening to people. I mean, when I first started, say Segovia came along first, just because this guy had actually suggested I listen to him. But shortly after, John Williams came along, who is now a good mate. I mean, you know, at the time he was God. You know, he was a complete idol.
He still is. To many people.
Yeah. And I think so. He should be. He's an excellent player. Then, perhaps shortly after, Julian Breen came along. Both brilliant players, but both totally different. That's very true.
I remember one of the things I read and I did learn from his book was Burt Whedon, and one of the things he said in the back was, when you practice slowly. And I think that's probably, and even I make that mistake when I'm playing things, when I'm practicing things, you tend to rush as opposed to focusing on the here and now, focusing on the moment.
Yep.
And really, concentrating on certain passages. And I know that I've had the privilege of watching you teach when I've attended some of your weekend schools, and I find it fascinating the way, the natural gift that you have as a teacher. They will be playing something, the student, and you go, "Oh yeah, can I just stop you there? Have you thought about doing that?" You've even done it with me. You said, have you thought about using that finger? Well, no, I haven't actually, Ray. Well, have you tried that? Yeah, you're right, Ray. It's easier, you know. Yeah. But listen, I can't thank you enough. It's a joy to have you here, and I know later on you're going to be playing for us.
Good to be here, yeah.
And maybe you'll allow me to play a tune with you as we go on. But Raymond Burley, bless you. Thank you for coming. Ladies and gentlemen, Raymond Burley.
Hey.